So one of I think the significant things about this program was that it happened in a time in people's lives when they were really open to significant experiences, and the fire service made it about as real as it can get.
But at this point in time, again, knowing that each one of us holds a bit of this story, but none of us holds all of this story, what we expect to do in the next, well, we'd like to do it in about 40 minutes, so I guess that means the one thing we'll ask is if you're telling a story, to try to do it in about 3 to 5 minutes.
Evergreen was out in the boom toolies, if you will. I mean, in those days, there was nothing around. Once you passed about 4th and Harrison and coming up the hill, or that was it.
So we'd like to start, and we're going to be asking you to stand at different times, and not everybody who stands has to come up, but maybe somebody represents it. So if you were here before the campus had buildings, or the buildings were under construction, would you please stand?
You're old.
If you were here,
The state of Washington decided they wanted this new college, and they decided they were going to put it in Olympia, and the cheapest place they could get land was out in the country. So this rural fire district was hired to provide fire protection for the college, and they gave them money to hire paid firefighters and some student firefighters, and then they integrated all those into a program with the volunteers to provide protection for the campus.
They were concerned that there was no fire protection, and they needed to have a certain level of fire protection to meet the codes and so on. So some folks at the McLean Fire District Number 9 came up with a program to have student firefighters that would be reimbursed with room and board in exchange for manning up the fire engines or the equipment. And when I was going to college in Tacoma, Tacoma Community College, I was applying, and I talked to my counselor, and he says, well, Evergreen looks like a good school that would fit you very well. And I looked at the program, and I says, that sounds like it. And a month later, I was part of the McLean Fire Department and one of the original 10 student firefighters.
I grew up on a dairy farm in western New York and heard about Evergreen I took an Outward Bound course after my first year of college in New York State. And I thought this was for me. So I came out to Evergreen with enough money to go to school for 1 quarter because I really didn't have the finances. And so after the first quarter, I saw in the Cooper Point Journal, I saw this little notice that they were seeking firefighters for the fire department.
I joined the fire department in 1976 after having taken a friend to a fire in Shelton and dropped him off. He was a volunteer firefighter, and then I saw the sign on the road for volunteers needed at McLean.
well, it just sounded like an adventure. I mean, for me, I think looking back, I really liked my adventures.
I discovered the real clincher, which was a campus fire station. And there was a really cool big red fire truck and a cool ambulance-looking rescue squad. And I thought, there's a fire station on campus? And this guy comes out on the front porch, and he had a little mustache and curly hair and a uniform shirt and uniform pants. And I said, hi. And he goes, oh, hey, hi. And I said, hey, what's it take to be a firefighter here? And he said, oh, well, you'd have to put an application in, and you'd have to cut your hair, because I had long hair and a beard. And he said, you have to cut your hair and cut your beard, I went, oh, okay, I can do all those.
And they told me, well, you'll have to cut off your hair, your ponytail, and your beard. And I said, okay, I'm willing to do that. That was the first time. That was a major change for me. But it was a commitment I was willing to make.
I said, is that it? And he goes, well, I said, oh, what about the mustache? That was it. And he says, oh, got to keep the mustache. Even the women here have mustaches.
Well, I entered the firehouse at 20 years old. And at 20 years old, you really don't know what you want to do. And it's hard to believe that, you know, at 21, they're letting you drive an 8-unit and a fire engine, and you're going on calls, you know, trying to save people's lives. But at that point, I was just bit by the bug and decided that that's what I was going to do. I was going to be a firefighter. And so, of course, I remember my very first CPR call on a Thanksgiving. I remember my first house fire that I went to. I remember the first baby that I delivered. But just living in that firehouse was just a great opportunity. I think that I always tell people that the student firefighter program at Evergreen in the 70s was like an ROTC program at another school university. We had to wear a uniform, or at least something blue. Some of the guys and gals even owned black shoes, but many wore Birkenstocks or sneakers and brown belts. But students were envious of us. All of our meals were at the food service. And so typically in the evening you'd get on the fire engine and you'd go up to the campus, get food, and we'd all sit together, the on-duty crew, the off-duty crew, and you could see that people were always intrigued, like there was a special bond between us because we lived and worked together. And then there were a bunch of people that were friends of ours, and they would come and hang out as well. And then those people would sit and eat with us as well sometimes, kind of extended family. We had to work whenever we went home on the holidays, so we usually would have Christmas and Thanksgiving at the firehouse and make a big meal.
So I was probably part of the second wave. Jonathan Larson, 1972. I had spent a few years in the Forest Service and was walking through campus. I didn't get a letter, but somebody said, hey, what the heck, a fire station on a college campus? What's that about? They said, oh, yeah, those guys, they got a good gig. You get free room and board for a duty shift every third night. And I think that's really what lured probably 90% of the people in the room.
I remember you catching the kitchen on fire.
Oh,
Do you
I
remember
don't
that?
quite remember that, but that probably was exciting.
My favorite story about Teddy is this guy used to pull out all of the, what do you call those things? The washer and the dryer.
Oh.
And he would mop behind them.
I still do that.
And I was like, this is the man I want to marry. Because he will mop behind the appliances.
We'll have to ask Judy. I still do that. Well, what I remember specifically about Spike is sitting in the day room. We had a TV up over here, and we had some chairs and tables. It's just sitting there and talking and just saying, I really feel very comfortable just kind of talking about life, what we're going to do, where we're going to go, just calls we'd been on, things that we're dealing with as young people, and that was just part of the fun of being a firefighter, away from the going out and saving lives and fighting fires kind of stuff.
Fighting lives, save fires.
That's right.
We were also of a group that was sort of, we're all new to the fire service. We had some paid officers who were pretty interested in interior attack firefighting, really bringing a line into a building to put a fire out, instead of just sort of stand out in the back and spray water on it, try to knock it down from the outside. And the fire chiefs had really founded this rural fire department some 20, 30 years earlier, and they were not interested in that kind of modern firefighting. So there was a lot of frustration for firefighters because we weren't allowed to go into buildings when we knew we could go into the building and put the fire out more effectively. And so there was a funny sort of tension between the paid officers and the student firefighters, the creepies, and the chiefs. We were often sort of complaining about the chiefs being stodgy in their approach. So more than one time we came back and groused about the way they had kept us from doing our jobs. So it was just a part of who we were, where we were in the time.
So I was a lowly student firefighter, got to learn how to drive the engine, became essentially the person who would drive the engine as I gained more experience, worked on the aid car, Aid 9 it was called, learned a lot of leadership skills, a lot of discipline, because we had to be disciplined in order to serve our duty shifts and be responsible for public service that we'd signed up for. I mean, I now run the largest labor union in the United States of America, 3 million members, the National Education Association. I wouldn't be where I am today if it hadn't been for Station 93.
Some of the challenging ones were the alarms at like 1 in the morning that, I mean, you were already trained but just went through totally automatic, that you didn't think about anything. You just went through because in the following day you had to go take a test for school. Those were the tough times.
I've said to a couple people tonight in discussing it, like, there wasn't a lot of drama in our group. And I think that's true. I think that's true across the line. And I think in part is because we were dealing with the drama and the trauma out in the world. And when we came home, we just didn't make that happen. And I just think we got along. I just can't believe how well we got along. And yeah, I think it, because we were dealing with outside problems, the inside had to keep it together.
I think one of the biggest things for me is that some of the first female firefighters in the state of Washington, actually the first female firefighters in the state of Washington, came out of our fire station, Station 93 at Evergreen, which is pretty cool.
I think I had met some firefighters, on campus, and they seemed like a good group, and I had no idea that there were no women there. I just assumed that there were.
And then you've got Kyle Wink, now known as Kyle Noble, who was the first woman to break the glass ceiling at Station 93.
It was in the winter of '76, and when I applied, for spring break, they were having their recruit academy. And so I went through the spring training, and at the end, they said, well, we kind of like you, and we were hoping, would you consider moving in now? And I said, well, yeah, well, of course, yeah. But at that time, there wasn't any women's quarters. And so they made a special arrangement that most of the guys, they were two to a room. So I got the room in the back, and so there was like 12 of us. I was the only woman, and I got the room in the back, and so there wasn't separate bathrooms either. So every time I would go take a shower or anything, I would have to put a sign on the door that said woman or something like that. You know, I want to say, whenever anything went wrong while we were there, the quote was, "They should have never let women into the fire service." Yeah, we all heard it.
I'm not really attracted to a pure male environment like the military or anything like that. I think the feminine touch adds a depth of emotional and connection, and so it really made all the difference in the world when women moved into the fire department. The egos sort of went out the doors, and we were a family rather than a bunch of kind of men playing military.
Yeah, it did change it.
It was changing for the better part.
So they, I think it's been mentioned that we were all involved in this experiment that brought women into the fire service and how it's seated. The other thing, part of that is that we ended up with a whole series of male firefighters who'd worked with women firefighters, who went to firefighter departments like Kent and Bellingham and all these and other places that had no women firefighters. So when they where I was, when City of Kent, we had 90 firefighters before we had any women. So I'm like, hard for y'all to believe this, but and so that when they did that, I was virtually the only firefighter in that group of 90 who'd ever worked with a female firefighter. So they had somebody to say, "Oh no, that's a bunch of baloney. Don't worry about that." So they didn't just seed women firefighters out there. We seeded male firefighters out into these fire departments that then went through the, which might seem like a transition. Some of the women in here had some pretty nasty things done to them in some of the fire departments.
The women really created a glue.
Oh, absolutely.
In this.
Absolutely.
Someone talked about helping us learn how to be strong enough to pass the physical test, and I came in after Maggie. Maggie opened up a space and I was able to come in, and I learned a lot about the fact that I wanted to be a firefighter and a paramedic, and we used to run up and down A dorm. Andy, you remember this, with air packs and goddamn heavy hose, up and down and up and down and up and down to get strong enough to take fire tests outside of Evergreen. And I took Olympia's test, and John Stocks knows the whole story on this, but anyway, I took 2 tests and passed 1 physical, and then, anyway, long story, I did get hired in Olympia as the first woman firefighter paramedic here.
A memorable call that I had as a student firefighter. I have one that kind of tells a story on me. When you're on duty, as a student firefighter, you're on duty not just during the day, you're on duty at night. So you could get a call where you wake up, and this is what happened. We got a fire call over at adult student housing, which wasn't on campus. I don't know if it still is, just it's the apartments adjacent to the campus. And it was a real fire call. I woke up at like dark 30, probably 1:30 in the morning, and I was half asleep like all the rest of us, but super excited because it was a real fire, and we were going to be the first fire engine there, and I was the fire engine driver. And I think it was the first time I pumped the fire engine at a fire. So there's a lot weighing on me, right? And I want to get there fast, and I'm half asleep. And the guys everybody's like on the rig, and we're going, and my duty officer's here next to me, and it's foggy, and you know how it is around here in the fall when we get black ice. And I'm driving, I'm like, I know where we're going, and where the fire station is, we take off and go down the road and to where we need it to go. We come to a T in the road, and we're supposed to take a left. And because of the fog, I came up on that T way faster. I mean, the fog is like, oh my God, and I'm stepping on the brakes, and I'm so worried about the guys in the back because they, at the time, were just on the tailboard. So they're riding, and there's no seat belts, they're just holding on to a pole back there on the tailboard. They're not on the rig, really, in a seat belt. And we make the curve, and the engine goes, and we slide it around, and we go up on the curve, and then I give it gas, and off we go. And they didn't fall off, thank God. And when we got there obviously really quickly. And I think it was a car fire up against close to the building. So we put the car fire out, and the building didn't catch on fire, and I didn't kill anybody that night. So there we go.
So we were heading to drill night, which is we would drill with the whole department on Wednesday nights. And so I'm driving the engine, and we're just about to where the circle is now, and it wasn't a circle then. And we get a call for the wood shop, and an accident in the wood shop. And it's like, shit, oh dear. And we're going pretty fast, and it's an icy night. And if I don't make this right turn right now, it's a long ways back around to get back to the campus. So I made the turn, but then my engine, the hind end of my engine cuts loose in the ice, and I'm sliding. We've got people on the tailboard. If I hit that curb, the engine's gonna go over. It has enough velocity at that point, you're gonna lose it. And it just kissed the curb, and people felt like, there it goes, and I gotta go forward again, the forward momentum, we got there. But then we get there, and of course, somebody has lost their fingers in the, I want to say a bandsaw, but that's not right, a circular saw. And we're searching through the sawdust for this person's fingers. And I find it. I find one of them. And I go to reach for that finger, and then I realize I am about to pick up a human part. And I realize that we are not meant to do that as human species. But I think the other thing is, in the fire department, you somehow find a place to stow that, because the good news about finding her fingers was that she could have them put back on, which actually did happen. But anyway, so I don't know. It was both the chaos of the drive-in and then just the chaos of the scene. I mean, I think by the time we were looking for fingers, the medics from Olympia had already arrived, and they were ready to take her to the hospital. Anyway, that was probably the most exciting call for me, but if you can call it excitement.
The story I would relate is there was, he's not here today. John Epstein was another student firefighter, and me and Bruce, and I can't remember who else was with Bruce, and Lonnie France was the duty officer, and someone else, and there was a car fire. And so they took off on the aid unit to go, and we were on the fire engine, and I was on the fire engine in the back, because we stood in the back, and we had two people in the front. Bruce was either driver or officer, and Eppo was back there with me. That was John Epstein's nickname. We were driving along, and all of a sudden, we weren't sure where this car fire was, so they stopped for a minute, and I think they were calling on the radio. And we were kind of confused, both John and I, for a moment, so we thought, okay, we should get off. They want to back the engine up. And so when you back an engine up, you have somebody get back and give directions. So we got back there, and all of a sudden, Eppo was doing this, and Bruce, the engine took off, and we had this little button. You push it twice to stop. But it's so loud in the cab that even when you push it, they may not hear it. So they tore off like a bat, like a hell, and Eppo's going like, and I'm looking at him and I'm going like, I can't stop the engine, and we just drive off. So then we're driving all around and everything. Well, in the meantime, Lonnie and the other duty officer are driving, and they see Eppo on the side of the road, and they go, what are you doing here? Get in this vehicle, we'll go and find this. So they get in the vehicle. Finally, we get and drive around, and the aid unit finally got to this vehicle, and it wasn't really a car fire, it was something else mechanically. So they go, and so Bruce and I all of a sudden pull up, and they drive up, and they're going, they see the duty officers and Eppo, and they look in, they're going like, he was supposed to be in the back, right? How did he get here first?
Tom and I were at Station 93 together, same time, and we had a pet at the station. Howard was a little dog that used to run around campus, and I think Howard had been abused.
Howard had been horribly abused. I think Sue Tepper adopted him, and it wasn't real clear to me. He ran away so much of the time when you could tell Howard knew we called him Howard because I would see him on campus and I'd say, "Hey, Howard," and he would look, figure out where you were coming from, and then he would run in the opposite direction as fast as he could.
You could never really get close to Howard. He wouldn't let anyone really get close to him. I think maybe a couple of the people at the station were able to get close to Howard, but Sue.
Well, I don't know how good a story it makes, but I do remember having a satisfying night. I took a stained glass class once down in some location. I don't remember exactly where, but then in the middle of the night, the plectron goes off, and I knew the address. It wasn't right at that house, but I went down there, and I remember pumping all night. I was a student captain at the time, I think, and I was an operator of the truck, and so I drove the truck and pumped. And there's slightly tricky operations when you have to go from a tanker. You have to, both draw off the tanker for water, but then when you change tankers, what do? Okay, there's no hydrant, right? So what you do is you operate off an internal tank in the thing, but if you let that get depleted, you're screwed. So what you got to do is it takes a little finesse of keeping the trick with these things, keeping the pressure correct at the end of the lines when you have a bunch of parallel and series lines of different diameters and different flow rates, and you got to calculate the pressure loss and get it right. Otherwise, they can't make a fog pattern and they get toasted. So doing that while you're also juggling the stuff and water thieving to refill the tank and juggling the stuff while the tankers go. I remember that, and I felt good about it because I did my job. I think the house burned to the ground anyway, but it wasn't my fault, and none of the guys got toasted. So it was gratifying, and I remember that.
I was on the rescue squad, on Squad 93 with Andy and Lonnie Franz, who's one of our duty officers, like our lieutenant. And we'd been on a couple medical calls, and at 3 a.m. we got tapped out for a structure fire, house fire. And so we went out there, and I was in the back riding along, and like, whoa, this is kind of wild. And it's a foggy night. I still remember the foggy lights, and now I'm losing my wine. Right? 2 sips, it's bad. We got to the house fire, and there was one engine there already, engine 92, and that was with Teddy Burke and Bruce Verhey, and they were down a long driveway, and we put all our gear on, our air packs and tools and everything, and Andy's like, stick with me, and we hiked down the driveway, and Lonnie's a pretty good sized guy, and he was cruising along after us. Andy and I were like short, scrawny guys. We scooted right down the driveway, and got there, and I'd never seen a house fire before, and here's this little house with smoke billowing out of it, and the engine's there, and Bruce is breaking out the front window with his helmet, and there's a hose line going in the back door and the screen door, and smoke's billowing through it, and I'm like, this is pretty wild. And Andy's like, stick with me, and I put our masks on, and we crawled in the back door on the hose line, and the first thing is my knees hit this hot, smoky water coming out at me, sooty water, as we're crawling in on the hose line. I'm like, what the hell am I doing? And then we just went in, and the next thing was just like, you're in it. Now you're just in the game, and it was one of the coolest things I'd ever done. And to this day, I train firefighters, and get them over that little hump initially where you're like, wow, what the hell am I doing? And then we kind of nurture them, and they get into it, and then it's just a big firefighter funhouse at that point. And we have a good time, and we're safe. But that was it. We went in and helped Teddy and put the fire out. A little old lady hanging out in the yard that one of the other firefighters was with her and helping her out. And then I was hooked, and that was like 1980, and that just hooked me.
So I think the reason Tom and I are here is because there's a fire at Station 91, and I'm a big part of that because I had bought my first car. I only had a motorcycle in college, and so I bought a 71 Volkswagen Squareback, and had some problems with it, so I brought it one night into the repair bay of the Station 91, which is on the far, I think, east end of the building, and I did some work with the spark plugs and this and that. It had a battery in it. I took it out to clean it, and then I put it back in, and it was a little bit larger battery than was supposed to be. It was under the rear seat, and it had a plastic thing so it went short out between the terminals and the seat. And I did that, closed it down, then went out, and then going to go to bed. And I closed the fire door. I was thinking, this fire door, maybe I should close it. So I closed it and went to bed. And then hours later, I don't know what time in the morning, 1 in the morning, plectrons went off. So what I remember is waking up to the plectron, and Station 9, I think it was District 9, Station 91, 111 response, fully involved structure fire at Station 91.
Yeah.
And I'm like getting up, I'm like, what? I don't smell any smoke, same thing. And then, I forget what happened. You went outside, I guess. I looked in the bay and just smoke in the rigs. And you're worried about a flashover, and I was thinking, we need to get the trucks out. So I was the person smart enough or dumb enough to open up the doors. So I ran over, opened up the doors, and not really thinking of a flashover. Maybe thinking, if I cause a fire, at least I should die trying to save everything. So we got the doors open, and then we pulled the trucks out and started fighting the fire.
Well, probably the most memorable as far as fires would be having an actual fire at the Evergreen State College in the dorms, in C dorm. And we routinely went to the dorms for fire alarms. And when you arrived on scene, you'd look and you'd give a radio report. And typically, without even thinking, you'd pick up the microphone saying that it was engine 91 or engine 92 or engine 93. On the scene, nothing showing, investigating. And in fact, that night, I got on the scene, identified the unit that I was on, and said nothing showing except for smoke. And then there was, in fact, a heavy fire on the second floor blowing out the windows of C dorm. And so all the training and all the practice and everything all came together and worked out well, and we extinguished the fire. No one got hurt.
About adrenaline rushes and fighting fires. It's like the old dog and new tricks, or the old war horse. I think if we had a fire here, like right now, we'd all these old firefighters would be like, oh yay, let's go put it out. Because it's something you can get kind of attached to doing. I don't know if it's really an addiction. I wouldn't be starting a fire to go put it out. But if a fire happened, you train and train and train for countless hours to do the right thing, and you never know when there's going to be a fire or when there's going to be a fire call. And when you're on duty and that occurs, you're super excited to use all the training, see if you can do the job right. And when it goes right, it's like ballet. It just is excellent. And it's an incredible rush to be able to help somebody do it quickly and do it in the right way.
So it's not something that you're used to seeing. The movies you see about fires are not what we experience, because they have to, it's a film's a visual medium. And the experience in a fire typically, if it's a fire of any consequence, is that you're crawling around in a very dark, smoky environment where you're moving towards heat, and you can maybe see some orange glow, but that's about it. So you're crawling low, because if you stand up, your ears are going to burn. And you're just trying to find the seat of a fire so that you can get water on the fire rather than spray water on smoke.
There was the first county-wide emergency medical services system in the country was here in Thurston County. Now, back in the 1970s, that was a big deal. It was a big deal to have a firefighter-paramedic program that was countywide in Thurston County. Paramedics in Thurston County also were allowed to do endotracheal tubes, which is essentially putting down the windpipe, a tube that actually allows you to be able to ventilate the lungs without aspiration coming up from through the esophagus and polluting the lungs. And being able to do an endotracheal tube in the field was very difficult. Endotracheal tubes are done in hospitals all the time, but when you're in the middle of the Interstate 5 and it's raining and it's 32 degrees and the rain is turning into black ice, and you have a car wreck, and you have somebody who has a collapsed lung, and you have essentially a paramedic on their belly putting an endotracheal tube down the person's windpipe in order to save them, is pretty miraculous. And people who came out of Station 93 at the Evergreen State College were people who did that all the time.
In the first quarter I was here, we were down at the old station on Mud Bay Road, and an instructor from Evergreen was trying to turn onto Overholtz Road because there wasn't any parkway then, and he was going to go up to campus. And he was driving an old mail van where you were standing when you drive, and you didn't have a door on it so that they could get out in and out of the van easily. And he didn't have a seatbelt, and he got broadsided and thrown from the vehicle and killed right there in front of the station. And for us, this was the first time we'd encountered death, and we were just months into starting this program. And then shortly after that, there was another multi-fatality accident down on 101 below the station, going down towards Mud Bay. Some family had turned, there wasn't an interchange back then, so it was just a cross street, and they turned up the wrong side of the freeway. And they came up the highway, and 2 cars hit them. There were 4 people in their car, and 2 in both of the other cars, and 6 people died that day. And it was, so like I said, it was a period where you were encountering really real things, and they were concrete, and you were learning to deal with them.
Let's see, the first time I did CPR was at the local country club in the bar. Had just gone to, I think, the first or second class, and was there with Ted Gattenbein, and I don't remember who else, and we're sitting there doing CPR on this poor guy, and surrounded by people sitting there with drinks in their hands. It was just really odd. So, and we weren't able to get him back.
My second call I really want to talk about, because I don't know how you're going to put this together, but was a very serious call. I mean, there's about as horrible thing as you could have happen physically to a human being, besides getting killed. And there was somebody killed with that call too, but I mean, it was, when you burn 90% of somebody's skin off, it's a serious event. Yeah, but it was just, no, I don't want to go into too much, but it was the second aid call I was on. I never remembered this first one after that, because it was later on in the fire business, I had another one that was very similar. But kind of makes you wonder right then, are you going to do this more or not? I mean, it was an open, it was a wall saying, no, is this something you're going to do or not? Because if you didn't, it was going to go, but I can still smell him. Right. I can.
We were serious about saving lives. We were serious about fighting fires. We drilled all the time. And I think having that focus kept us very aware of being a family. I backed this guy up on a hose line when he ran into a burning building in a life and death, and he backed me up, and we picked up pieces of bodies and all those things, and it's unique. It's unique in my experience of the relationships. I haven't seen these guys for 40 years, and I still feel like they're my best buds, and I feel like that hasn't changed at all.
We went on a lot of very tragic calls where people died, and you had to hold, I remember one of my first calls was just, holding someone's head that was, it was like half his head was off. He had, run right into a telephone pole, his head. And so you have those calls, and I think when you get, that's the beauty of the relationships we have, is that you get back to the station and you deal with a lot of what you see with humor and companionship, and I think that's why we're all here tonight, is that we had those similar experiences, and it creates a bond, and so all these people are special because we've all had these similar experiences. It's like going to war, and you know the bonds that you get from that experience. It was the same sort of thing, because we saw a lot of stuff, and you just come together. What favorite memories I have to share would be generally the feeling of the camaraderie that we had at the station. It was known as the only sorority and fraternity on campus. You know, we lived there. We are all kids at the time. We had a great time together. We helped each other. We clowned around a lot, and we actually did real work. We went on real calls that had real consequences for the, certainly medical calls for the people that had called 911 for us, and we went on real fires. And fire doesn't matter whether you're a career or a volunteer. When you're going to a fire, fire treats you the same way. So you come away from that with a really sobering realization that this is not a game. Just because we're students doesn't mean that we're not doing real work and helping people.
What made the student firefighter program so special? You know, I think, like I said earlier, it was a mix of young men and young women, for sure, so it was family. I've been to other student firefighter programs that are similar, like in Pullman, and they're still somewhat male-dominated, so it's more of a fraternity, and ours was definitely more of a family in that sense. I mean, I'm sure they're all family, but I think there was a lot of empowerment and you can see it in the photographs people see with the people who lived in the station over the years, and it went on from early 70s to early 80s. And everyone I saw in my short duration there, of a few years being part of that program, were very, very smart, well-educated evergreeners who have other careers now, a lot of them, you know, professors, et cetera. One's a physics professor in Chicago. You know, Grant Bunker, I just talked to and found that out. So, just like Phil Bennett. So some really smart, well-educated, and well-rounded, and conscientious, environmentally conscientious folks, and an opportunity to do something that's just really fun and help people. You know, as many people know, 80% of the calls we go on are medical calls, so you get to help people, and in their worst day, whether it's medical or fire, and I think it's really inspirational.
There's a family bond that occurs that you just don't find in any other situation in my life that I've been. I mean, you know, other than actually having a family and a son and so forth, and that's kind of a treasure to carry. I'm been very lucky.
The school contracted with the fire department for fire protection. And within that contract, they were going to have 10 students, current students at Evergreen, that would live at the fire station. They would compensate them with food service tickets to get their meals. And you got a small stipend on holidays. You had the opportunity to work summer seasonal hire. At the time, I think it was $15 to $25 a day. And that was, oh, and you got a free place to live. And that worked out, but the crew decided that they wanted to organize and become unionized. And I think that upset, or that made the school nervous. And so at the end of that contract cycle, they said, hey, we're not going to support the student firefighter program anymore. We will continue to contract with the fire department, but we're not going to fund the student program. And then the fire department was like, we're not going to fund it either. So the program ended. But in the end, like I said, nothing really changed. We kept working shifts. We kept living at the station. We no longer received financial compensation, but we had a place to live at the station. So we sort of shot ourselves in the foot over that.
After being a student firefighter, I did control burning, I planted trees, and then I went to nursing school. And I am a registered nurse. I work in the intensive care unit at the Virginia Hospital Center in Arlington, Virginia. I did 5 years in outpatient dialysis, and then I went into the ICU. And most of my career has been ICU. I love it. I found my passion. And no, I do not want to be a nurse practitioner. Why would I want to do that? I love what I'm doing. And it inspired me to go on in my career. I went to paramedic school as a result of my experience here. I got hired in Olympia with Olympia Fire Department. I was the first woman firefighter hired there as a firefighter paramedic in December of 1980. And I worked there my whole career as a firefighter paramedic and then as an officer, and retired in 2007 after 27 years. So this start that I had here at Evergreen totally influenced my life.
And the other thing to do is that we, women in the fire service, like I was mentioned, but really what we did is we seeded a whole bunch of people who had an idea of humanity that wasn't necessarily universal in the fire service at the time. It was a lot more kind of old guard, and we took and seeded those people all around Puget Sound. And I think that we affected the fire service.
That has been a formative experience in my life. You know, all of the experiences that I have in McLean have come with me. I saved a life about 4 months ago, just like that, just out of habit, just knowing how to do the Heimlich maneuver when the circumstances presented themselves. And also have taken command of fire situations that I've encountered over the years, and it's just been an incredible experience.
Old firefighters, I don't think we retire. We just kind of die out eventually, and they bury us with a hose line or something. So I'll keep doing it till the day I can't do it anymore, I'm sure.
I think it was love. We loved what we were doing. We loved the other people who were doing it with us, and we loved where we were in our lives. And we never expressed that kind of emotion, but it was there at a very deep level. We cared for each other. We would risk our life for each other. Really, I think it was love, a deep love for each other. Totally unexpressed, except occasionally in romantic relationships, but for the most part, it was part of the job. When you're in a job where you risk your life and you save other people's life, if you don't love your partner, you're not willing to do that. You're not willing to give up your life for the other person. If somebody needed to be rescued, we would have gone in and got him. If something needed to do that, and you can't do that unless you love what you're doing. So I think it's love.
He says that, and in the house where people are staying for the retreat, somebody said there's a lot of love here. And then Tom had called earlier to make sure that we didn't need anything this afternoon. And I said, there's a lot of love in this group. And Tom was like, there's a lot of love in this group. So, yep,
You agree?
I totally agree.
Being at the fire station gave me an opportunity to grow into a man from a boy. I had to teach first aid classes, CPR classes. You had to learn to be a public speaker. And I always tell guys I went and I worked for one of the smallest fire departments in the country, and I worked for one of the largest fire departments in the country. And I'm retired now, and I actually collect a pension and could just do that and ride my bike. But hey, I got my start from the McLean Fire Department, and so I'm giving that back. I teach for the student program that we have, and try to help teach at the volunteer program. I run and coordinate the County Tech Rescue Program and teach for them as well. And so they gave me a start, and it was a great career and a great life, and so I'm just kind of paying that back now.
Well, I want to take this opportunity to thank Maggie, Kyle, Dave, Andy, and all the people who came together to put this together, because this is a once-in-a-lifetime experience. These people, they're from all over the country and the world, and we're getting a little older. I'm 70 myself, and it's really incredibly powerful to get in touch with the roots. We are who we are today because of what we did together back then. It had a tremendous impact on us. And so we have to offer, I have to offer thanks for that experience, because I wouldn't be who I was without it.
I think I'm good. It's I'm really glad I came. And I'm gonna cry again. I know it put a stamp on my life that I'm a better person for having. Thanks.